Hello and welcome to my channel, Bumzibi Beauty. My name is Juliana, and in today's video I'm going to be ranking my Natasha Denona palette. This is actually going to be an updated ranking because I did have one last year when I had 12 of her palettes. Now I currently have 18 of her palettes, plus my taste and the way I do my makeup has changed, and the way I see a palette as well has changed, so my ranking has changed. So I thought I would do an updated one, and that's what today's video is, an updated ranking of Natasha Denona palettes in my collection. Now let's get on with it. Alright, before we start on this ranking, just to let you know, I have two videos where I have rearranged my Natasha Denona palette, both the medium size and the big size ones. So my palettes are not the way they came. So for example, this is my Glam palette. Well, at least that's the casing of it, but this is the inside of my Glam palette. So I have changed things around, and I have no intention of putting them back the way I bought them, because this is the way that works for me and that's what I do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a picture, the original picture of the palette. Wherever I've changed the palette, I'll put the original picture up there, but I will show you my new palette and how I use that palette, and that's the way I'm going to be doing this ranking. Okay, in 18th position is my mini tropical palette, which for whatever reason I can't find. As I'm speaking, you should be seeing the picture, and it's just a basic 5 different shades that don't really correlate. Maybe the blues might have some sort of relationship, but the rest are just like pop of colors, which is what I use it for at the moment. When I need a pop of color, maybe like a green or that lilac or the blue, I use it as a pop of color. I never really, apart from 2 occasions, I've never really used it as a complete palette. And I mean, I have quite a few other palettes, so for me to kind of use that as one palette is very difficult. I only just kind of reach in and grab one shade, and that's even far between. I rarely touch that palette now unless I really need any of the colors, because some of the colors in there are quite unique. I mean, let's not lie, that turquoise blue shade, even though I do have some singles somewhere, but the turquoise blue shade is quite unique. The blue shimmer, that's unique as well. So I definitely use them as pop of colors, especially in my inner corner, sometimes when I need that particular shade or I need it to blend a darker shade out. Well, it's quite rare, so that's why it's coming in at number 18 for me. Okay, in 17th position is my mini Zendo palette, and the only reason why it's coming in at number 17 is because I've not touched this palette since I got it. I think I bought it when the retro palette came out. I mean, even though it's like beautiful sets of colors, especially this dark wine kind of shade, oh, it's beautiful, but I haven't had a chance to use this palette, so I can't judge beyond the color range of the palette. So for me, it's number 17. In 16th position is going to be my Glam palette, and this is because even despite this is not what is in the Glam palette. Obviously, I've moved that around. In fact, I think I only kept one shade from the Glam palette in this particular one, and it's that shade. And the reason why I'm putting Glam palette in 16th place is because even though I consider other stuff like using another palette or using it with any other palette, I still haven't changed my mind in terms of cool tones. I mean, I'm beginning to use more and more of cool tones, but it still won't be my go-to color. It won't be my first choice. If I want to do my makeup or whatever, Glam palette or cool tones or gray shades will never be my first option. And for me, it's just like an accent palette where I just maybe need a shimmer here or there, and that's why I bought the palette in the first place. I love all the shimmers in the palette separately, but not as a palette as a whole. So that is the problem, that's the issue for me. I like the shades in it. I like maybe to use 2 together with something else, or 1 with something else, or inner corner highlights, you know, different varieties, but not together as a whole. Together as a whole, I wouldn't even know what to do with it unless I introduce black or some other color with the palette, and for me, that's why I'm putting it at number 16. In 15th position is my gold palette, and this is now my version of the gold palette. In my previous ranking, I said if you take away just the little pop of color there, the rest of the colors are really browns. They are brown, creams, and generally light colors really. So what I've done, I've left 5 colors out of the gold palette, the original gold palette. I left this green, I left this golden shade, and this shimmers right here, and I added a pop of red, you know, and these other shades. For me, this makes the gold palette looks more wholesome than what it was before. What it was before was just bar 3 shades. They were just boring. They were so meh. So for me, this works for me better. This makes me want to reach out for the shimmers more, because I do love the shimmers in the gold palette. I can't just add shimmers on my highs. I mean, some people love that, but for me, I'm a matte and shimmer kind of girl. So for me, this works better. I can do green look, I can do a red look, I can do a purplish look, you know, with the gorgeous shimmers in this palette. So this works more for me. But on the whole, if I was to consider how the palette came, for me is number 15. Alright, ranking in at number 14 is my Lila palette. I didn't watch my previous ranking video, but I think the 14 is definitely higher than what it was last time. And the reason is because I've come to see the original shades in the Lila palette differently ever since Natasha came out with the retro palette. For me, it just makes more sense looking at those two palettes together. For whatever reason, I don't know why. Maybe it's because there's too much burgundy in the retro palette, and in the Lila palette there's too much purple, but if you kind of look at them together, they kind of like suit and fit each other, and that's why Lila palette is now coming higher in my ranking. But again, I have changed the inside of my Lila palette, so this is my Lila palette now. I think I retained about 3 colors in the original palette, but for me, this is how I see the Lila palette now. I'm not, when purple is too much in a particular palette, it puts me off, but a little bit of purple and some colors to kind of like blend or make the purple palatable, yeah, I can live with that, and that's why I changed my palette, and this is what I've made my Lila palette to be. In terms of my ranking, Lila palette is at number 14. In 13th place is my mini gold palette. I love this palette. It's a shame that you can't do too many looks with it on its own. However many looks you can do with this palette is just gorgeous. She picked colors that speak to me when it comes to this mini gold palette. I love it. And for me, I'm ranking it at number 13. 12th position is my bronze palette, and this is my bronze palette now. And if you compare my bronze palette to the original one, well, at least to me anyway, this is so much more beautiful. I personally get bored very easily. So for me, the bronze palette is just too many of the same things. Yeah, maybe a little bit of variation. But when I look at it, I just get bored very quickly. And that's why I've mixed, even though I've retained the kind of storyline I want to say of the palette, which is like browns and bronze. I've put in pop of different colors that just makes it more exciting for me to use. I mean, look at that orange with the green and with the bronze. I think it just makes more sense being a bronze palette the way it is than what it originally is. And that's just the way I use it. I mean, even though it's beautiful on its own, it just makes me want to use it more the way it is, and I love it this way. So bronze palette is number 12 for me. Ranking in the 11th position is my Love palette, and if you look at the original Love palette and my palette, the only things I've really changed is take out the purples in this palette, because it didn't really speak to me with the purples. For me, the Love palette, pink and red just seems to make more sense, and that's what I've mainly done. So I love the Love palette. I love red, and I love pink in terms of red. I don't mind the pinks in the Love palette. I think they go very well together, just not with the purple, and that's just why I took them out. So the Love palette for me is number 11. In 10th position for me is my Safari palette, and this is coming higher than my previous ranking, I think, because the last time when I ranked it, it was based on the fact that it was an all matte palette. I don't really do all matte looks. I like to have shimmers in my looks. Even though I love the Safari palette, it didn't rank higher because I couldn't use it on its own. I would have to dig for a shimmer. But since arranging it, since seeing it in different ways, and since using it with my other singles, it's just ranked higher in the way I use it and in the way I love the shades. So this is now my Safari palette, which if you look at our other palettes, this kind of looks like a Biba palette now. I don't have the Biba palette because I just don't see how I can pay for that kind of money for browns. It's not me. So for me, this makes more sense because I was able to use most of the matte shades in the Safari palette and mix it with my other palette, and it just made more sense. I mean, looking at this now, this is now a pretty much gorgeous neutral palette. Honestly, it is beautiful for me anyway. It is really beautiful. So Safari palette is number 10 for me. In 9th place is the retro palette, which is fairly new in my collection, but I've used this palette quite a few times, including for today's look. I actually used 3 palettes for this look, and one of the palettes I used was Mcgrath Subversive, and then I used retro and the Triochrome palette for this look. This palette, even though it's pretty much very new in my collection, I think I probably use it more than a lot of palettes that I have from Natasha. I love this palette, especially that shade. I think I'm about to eat pan on that. Shade is cream to matte, but for me, it's my favorite shade. That with Groove, I love so much. They are so yummy. If you are new to my channel, I love red and any variation of red. So burgundy, reddish tones, brown red, yellow red, whatever is any variation of red, I love. So I love this palette. The only reason it's not higher up in my ranking is because at the end of the day it's still a monochromatic palette, and monochromatic eventually will bore me. If not that it's red I'm attracted to in this palette, I'll probably be bored by now. I don't really like monochromatic palette, but this palette is gorgeous. I like the light shades, even the pinkish shades in this palette. I love the peachy shades. I just like the way, you know, the palette has been put together. And for me, retro palette is number 9. Ranking it at number 8 is the cranberry palette. I mean, like I just said, I love reds. And this shade, even though it's pink, I mean, I think it just goes well. It goes so much well together. Despite the fact that this palette is 5 shades, you can still create a lot of looks with this palette, which is what I love about it. I mean, just one matte with one of the shimmers is enough. You know, any variation of the shimmers, I love this palette. Even though this is tending towards pink, it's still like a pinkish red. It's so perfect, you know. I mean, and the only reason that this is number 8 is because I just love the others more and they have more shades in the palette. And that's the only reason why cranberry is coming in at number 8 for me. Alright, in 7th position is another reddish palette, and it's the Joya palette. Oh my days, this palette is gorgeous. This gold, so beautiful, honestly. Oh god, let me swatch it for you. In fact, I'm going to swatch 4 shades in this palette. Oh, and it's just because, so you can just see the gorgeousness in a 5-pan palette. Oh, this is 4 shades in the Joya palette. Absolutely beautiful. That red, that gold, oh god, this palette is lovely. So lovely. I wish you would create, you know, a bigger palette, you know, based on this Joya palette. Start from these 5 colors, then build other colors along and make it a full palette. Oh my word, I possibly will be one of the first people to buy the palette. I just think Joya palette is a perfect palette for me. It's such a beautiful, I mean, you saw the 4 shades, just 4 shades, absolutely gorgeous. It's so much my taste. I love the Joya palette, and the position I'm ranking it is just because it's only 5 shades. So Joya palette is number 7 for me. Okay, we're at number 6. This is Sunset palette coming in at number 6. This ranked number 1 for me in my last year ranking, and this is my version of the Sunset palette now. I haven't so much changed it a lot, you know, from the original. I mean, you'll be looking at the original now. All I've done is made it less of a monochromatic palette by adding just a few shades, you know, that are different from orangey. I've added green if I wanted a green on my lower lash, and this shade here, oh my days, absolutely beautiful. Let me just swatch that for you. No, this just makes more sense. I took 3 more shades from this palette that I've made, and just so that you can get a gist of the color story. I mean, look at that. That is gorgeous, isn't it? Compared to what the Sunset palette was originally. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Sunset palette on its own, absolutely beautiful. I love oranges just like I love red and I love browns. In fact, those are my 3 favorite shades. So Sunset palette for me was always okay, but I thought I could make it better, which was why I rearranged mine. And I will link the videos where I rearrange all those palettes. I will link it to this one, so you can just get a feel of my thoughts. But looking at this palette now, it makes me want to pick it up more than what it was before. So there was nothing wrong with the Sunset palette. I just believed I could make it better, and that's what I've done. So for me, this is a perfect Sunset palette with my taste now, because I wouldn't just do an orange look. I would want to pull it together with, you know, a different look, and it just makes this perfect for me. So Sunset palette, number 6 position for me. Okay, in 5th place is going to be the Metropolis palette, which is now discontinued, unfortunately. I think the gold palette I didn't mention earlier, that's discontinued as well. So what I've converted my Metropolis palette to, I converted to a plain neutral palette. So all of my excess browns and oranges and colors that are just excess from other palette, I just put everything together in my Metropolis palette when I was rebuilding them. So right now, this is a perfect neutral palette for me. I mean, look at that. It's got gold, it's got bronze with pops of red. It's got browns tones. It's just a perfect neutral palette for me. I mean, I would never use a plain neutral palette because I would just get bored. So, but with this one, I could never get bored because it's got so many variations of neutrals. I could go golden neutral, bronzy neutral, red tone neutral, anywhere I want to go really. So for me, this is a perfect neutral palette. Ranking in at number 4 is the Triochrome palette, and this palette is absolutely gorgeous, and is, like I said earlier, is part of the palette I have on my eyes today. So it's all of this green, well, mostly all the greens anyway, and some purple. But this is the Triochrome palette, so this is definitely number 4 for me. I love this palette. I absolutely love this palette, especially these greenish colors, these 3 shades here. Beautiful. Even the purples, I love the shade, the tones in this palette. I love this palette. For me, I wouldn't change anything in this palette, and is why I've not rearranged it as well. I absolutely love it. This is what, when Mcgrath was going to bring out a Ethiopian palette, this is the kind of tones, you know, that I was expecting. You know, you don't have to give us like the boldest color, but, you know, just some sort of hues of, you know, Ethiopian, like this palette is giving me. I mean, let me just watch 4 of the shades for you so you can understand what I'm talking about. So that's the green in that palette. I mean, these 3 are multi-chromes, but absolutely beautiful. See, this is what I'm talking about. It's like a pastel rainbow, but you still got the hue, bit of darker hues with that green pulled together. Fairy colors really. I love this palette. This is what I was definitely expecting Mcgrath to come out with when she was teasing us with the Utopian Dream series and all the pictures and all the postings, you know, on Instagram. As much as I love the Triochrome palette, it's coming in at number 4 for me, and the only reason is because the top 3 I love more than I love the Triochrome, but Triochrome palette is number 4 for me. Okay, we are nearly there, just 3 more palettes left to rank. So number 3 for me is the Sunrise palette. Again, like I said, I love red. I'm going to sound like a broken record. And this is my own new Sunrise palette, but the original Sunrise palette for me is number 3, and the reason is because of the gorgeousness of the reddish tones in that palette. I mean, the Sunrise palette for me is got the perfect hues, you know, of orange tones, of yellowish orange, orange red. The palette is just perfect for me. I have no complaints, nothing at all. The only reason why I rearranged that palette is because I needed those shades to complete all the other palettes. Otherwise I would leave my Sunrise palette like that. But the shades in the Sunrise palette was just so good, I had to spread it to the others to make them perfect for me. So that was the only reason why I put my Sunrise palette apart. In its place now in the casing is what I consider to be like my purplish or purplish variation palette. But Sunrise palette, perfect palette, perfect red tones palette. If you are an orange lover, a red lover, it is a perfect palette. I have no cause for complaint. I have nothing to change in that palette. It's just a beautiful palette. So Sunrise for me is number 3. And in second position is the Zendo palette. I love the Zendo palette. So this is my Zendo palette. I have not touched it. I have not moved it around. I have not changed anything. I have no intention of changing anything. It's an absolutely beautiful palette. Again, look at it. It's got the oranges and it's got the green. What more can you ask for? This palette is absolutely beautiful, and I would never change anything in it. When she first came out with the palette, oh my days, I hyperventilated. Not a joke. I so much love the palette. I just had to wait for it to go on sales before I could buy it. But for me, I love this palette. I won't change anything about it. I won't even move it around. It's just perfect the way it is. Maybe in future years when she brings out more palette, I might feel the need to move the shades around and spread it across my other palettes. But right now, I am enjoying it the way it is. And for me, it's number 2 when it comes to Natasha Denona's palettes. And number 1, you probably guessed. If you know me so well, you will know what my number 1 is going to be. It's new in my collection. It was never in my ranking last year. My number 1 Natasha Denona palette currently in my collection is the Sako Loco palette. When this palette came out, the only thing that stopped me from buying it was the price. I just could not pay the full price for the palette. It pained me to wait for a sale. Honestly, it was painful. I'm not joking. Really painful. When I saw people doing looks with it, or I saw picture of it, when I see those oranges, oh my days, I would grit my teeth just so I don't buy it and just wait for the sales. It was painful, I am not gonna lie. So the minute it came on sale on Natasha's palette, I jumped on it it like no man's business. Now I've moved my shades around in the way that it suits me. So because this is not how it came, I haven't taken out any shade from the palette, but I have moved it around. And right now you should be seeing the original Colourpop palette, and the reason why I moved mine around is because it makes more sense to me like this. It makes it look less like a clown palette. I mean, the way she arranged it before, it kind of maybe fitted in with the name Colourpop, you know, the circus or whatever. But I don't like it for that. I like it because it's colorful. I think it's very daring for a brand like Natasha Denona to bring out a colorful palette like this, but I think she made the right decision because it's absolutely gorgeous. If you're a color lover, you would love this, and there's no need to be intimidated about any colors here, which is why I've arranged it this way, because when you see the way it was, it kind of looked like it was all over the place, or it was too scary for people to use. But if you look at it or arrange it in the way that it makes sense to you, it's so much easier to use. I mean, you can use this in any line now. So you have like the pink oranges, the greens, the orange, the blue, the purple. It just makes more sense to me this way, and it's such a perfect palette. It's not too colorful for my taste. It's not too colorful. It's just yummy, just so yummy. The mix of the blue and the purples on this side, you know, you can do anything. This on the upper lid, green on the lower lid, the green on the upper lid, purple on the lower lid. You can do anything with this palette. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm really hoping that one day Mcgrath will come out with a palette like this. Honestly, I'll be the first in line to buy such a palette. I'm so glad that Natasha was bold enough to come out with a palette like this. It is an absolutely gorgeous palette, at least for me, for my taste. I absolutely love this palette. No complaints, nothing whatsoever to say. Definitely deserves the first position in my collection. So this is my top Natasha Denona palettes. Alright guys, that's the end of my ranking. Please let me know your top 3 Natasha Denona palettes. Put this in the comment section. Let me know if you agree with me or you disagree with me or whatever your opinion is. But this is my ranking of my Natasha Denona palettes, all 18 of them. Alright guys, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed this ranking and you've enjoyed hanging out with me. If you have enjoyed this video, please like it, share it and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, I'll see you.